Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. I promised in the last video that I was going to show you a system for allowing the player to choose to re-roll a role that their character had failed. And I've done that, and that's what I'm going to show you in this video. So we see the starting screen. This is the same as it was. We can change our race. We can adjust our characteristics as before. Let's choose a dwarf. Now you'll see this is basically the same as before, except that there's a new bit of information in this little miniature character sheet here, as well as the attributes. We have this Rerolls 3. I've set this up so that everyone gets 3 rerolls. If there was a luck attribute, I'd probably make the number of rerolls related to the luck attribute, but at the moment there isn't, so 3 rerolls. And we have the choice. Let's wade across the river. And in this particular case we were quite lucky, but let's do it again. Well, this time we failed, and you can see we get this choice of we can accept the result or we can re-roll. If we accept the result, we will die, of course, as we know, or at least as you'll know if you've seen the previous videos. So let's re-roll again, and in this case we're lucky and we roll a 1, and the game continues as if we had succeeded on the first roll. If you fail a second time, you don't get to re-roll a third time. You can only re-roll once per roll in this particular system, and you'll notice that the re-rolls have been reduced by 1, and if we had run out of re-rolls we wouldn't have been given the option to use another re-roll. So that's what it does. Let's see the code that allows this to happen. As you can see, it sort of requires more pages. Well, at least as you'll see if you've been following these videos, it did require adding pages or breaking up the code into more pages actually. But there is no new there are no new commands that we need. In fact, we're abandoning include, which is one of the ones that I've talked about recently, and gone back to go-tos, and I'll show you that as we go. But so we have in the initialize page, let's zoom in a little bit, we have a few new variables. RR being the number of RR standing for rerolls, of course. That's the number of rerolls that the player has left. As you can see, I've set it to 3. UR, this is a sort of flag. It's set to 1 if the player has already re-rolled for this particular on this particular roll. Because as I said, I decided, as is often the case in tabletop role-playing games, if you get a re-roll, you can only re-roll a given roll once. You can't just sit there and re-roll until you get it. So I decided to have that sort of system, and so we need a flag that tells the computer when the player has used up their re-roll for this particular time. And that is UR. I think it stands for used re-roll. And then we have SF, standing for success or failure, which is set to 0 if the player fails and 1 if... 0 if the player fails. I've written it down wrong. 0 if the player fails and 1 if they succeed, of course. I've also done something which I should have done before, if I'm honest, but I only realised the need for it today. And that is, if you remember, we have this special page called Story Caption. This is the one which prints the little character sheet. it is called story caption just because the program has sort of reserved that title, that it knows that if there's a page called story caption, you don't need to ever go to it to activate it. It just activates in the sidebar on every page. As a result of that, if you use variables like Z or X or Y, or temporary variables, in story caption, you might also be using them in the main page, and that might sort of mess up the values for you. So what I've done is I've set V to be a variable to be used only in story caption, and nowhere else. And that way we won't accidentally set V to be 2 or something, and then the program won't do what we wanted it to do because of what happens to V in the story caption page. So this looks the same as it did before. It's just that I've changed various Zs and stuff to V, and made a note that V is sort of to be set aside, only to be used on that page. So the ones that we have to keep track of in terms of the code for the rerolls is RR, which is the number of rerolls left, UR, which is set to 1 if the player has already chosen to reroll this particular roll, and SF, which is the final result. So we go to, let's say, Wade. The same thing would happen if we'd chosen the other choice. But anyway, I'll just use this one as an example. So you'll notice there's less code here, or again, you'll notice if you have been following these videos, that there's less code here. It's sort of been split. What used to be just on this page has now been split between this page and this page. And the reason for that is because a goto, once you go to somewhere, the rest of the code is ignored. So if we had other things we want to do, we have to do them on a separate page. So we set Z to 6. That's the number of the attribute that we want to roll against. We set W to Wade 2, and that is the name of a page. This is what we're doing instead of include. If you remember the chapter in which I talked about include automatically sends you back to where you were once it's finished and you come to the end of the page. Goto doesn't do that. It doesn't sort of have any memory. It doesn't remember where to go next. So we have to remember it in some other way. And I've done that by having a variable. So this is the name of a page, and what that's telling the computer is when we're finished, we're going to want to go to Wade 2, which is this one here. So we set Z to equal to 6, and if we look back at our initialize and count the 6th one of this, remembering that this one is 0, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll know that we're rolling against size, which is what we want, because we're sort of rolling to see if the river is too high for the player character. So we set Z equals 6, W as Wade 2, and then we go to roll versus attribute. And this is similar to how we had it before, but there are some differences. So we go, Y is random 1 to 20, so we roll, it's sort of the equivalent of rolling a D20 or a 20-sided dice. We set X equals this long line of code. Span style equals color red. Now, what I've got here, this slash quote, what that means is just count that as a quotation marks, but it's when we're working with strings, because if I did something like that, if I didn't do that, the computer would say, okay, well, there's the quote mark, that's the start of the text. Yep, that makes sense. Span space style equals that's a quotation mark. That's the end of the string. Well, we don't want it to be the end of the string. We want we want that quotation mark to be sort of part of the string that's being put into X. So that slash, sort of top left to bottom right slash, followed by a quote, just means count this as sort of part of the text instead of being the indicator that it's the end of the text. So span style equals quote color red, quote rolling against ATZ. If you remember, AT is the names of the different attributes. Z is which attribute we're rolling against. So that will just become SIZ, or capital SIZ. This says until this paragraph ends, all the text is red by default. So rolling against size, rolled 14 or whatever it may be. If the roll is higher than the player character's value, then we know that that's a failure. So we add failure to the message. X is going to be a message. And then we set SF, which we'll remember is a flag telling us whether we succeeded or failed. We set that to 0. And otherwise, in other words, if the roll is not over the player character's relevant attribute, if it's under or equal to it, then we do something very similar as gets it success, and SF is 1. Now, you might be asking, why do we have this big X string that looks like it's going to be some text? Why don't we just print that out as we go? And the reason we don't print that out as we go is that because if you tell the computer to print out some text, and if you then tell it to go to somewhere else, the text doesn't get printed. You don't see it. So what you've got to do, if you've got text that's going to be printed, you have to store it in a variable and then go to where you want to go to, then print the variable. Otherwise, the player won't see the text that you need. So we have all this text, and then the text ends with slash span, which just means the sort of end of the paragraph, and then 2 line breaks. And then we ask whether it's worth thinking about rerolls. Well, it's worth thinking about rerolls if they failed the roll, because obviously you don't want to reroll a successful roll. If they've got spare rerolls, and if they haven't already chosen to reroll for this particular roll. If all of those things are true, then it might be worth talking about a reroll. So let's look at the simpler option, which is that we're not giving them the option for reroll. Perhaps they succeeded. Perhaps they ran out. We just set UR to 0 in case it isn't. That could happen if they rerolled and succeeded on the second go. And then we go to W. Now you remember from this one that W is weighed 2, and the computer knows that go to W doesn't mean look for a page, or sorry, go to $W. It knows that the $sign is a special indicator of a variable, and it knows that if it says go to $sign something, it doesn't mean look for a page that's called $sign something. It means go to the page that is the same as the value of that variable. So in this case, it won't try and go to $W, it'll go to weighed 2. So that's the sort of simple option. There's no option for a reroll. Just go to wherever we've previously stored. And let's look at what happens if we do that. Well, we'll go to weighed 2. It'll print X. It'll print out all that text that we've been sort of saving up. And then it'll give you a message based on the value of SF. In other words, based on whether you succeeded in the roll. If you didn't succeed in the roll, you're too short to keep your head above water and you drown and you lose. And if SF does not equal 0, which can only mean that it equals 1, it means that you made your roll and you're fine and you win. Now, of course, in real life, this wouldn't be the end. There'd be some more code, taking you to whatever you face next. But so let's go back to role versus attribute. Let's see if they. Let's look at what happens if we do want to give them the option for the reroll. First, $X. Print out all this text because we're going to give the player a couple of options, and we want to print out the text we've got so far. Otherwise, it sort of will be in the wrong order. It won't make sense. So we print out something like rolling against size. You rolled a 14, you failed, something like that. So we print .x, and then we set x to an empty string, that quotation marks, a string with nothing in it. And the reason for that is because you remember that when we go here, we print x, and we don't want to print it twice. So we print it out. Sorry, I'll just scroll down. We print it out, and then we set it to be empty. And so if we were to go to Wade 2 and it printed it out, it wouldn't print anything, and so there wouldn't be any, anything being printed twice or being printed out of order. So we're going to give the player two choices: accept the result or reroll. Accept the result goes to this page called fail, and fail is another go to W. Why not just, you might ask, well, why do it like that? Why not just have W in there? And the reason is that when I did it like that, it does seem to try and treat it as a page called $W, which is obviously not what we want. We don't want it to go to the page called $W. We want it to go to the page whose title is the same as the value of the variable W. So that's why we have that. That's why we have that that link. Or we have the other option, which is reroll, and that sends us to role versus attribute, which is the very page that we're on. Except that RR is minus minus, in other words, is reduced by 1. Remember that RR is the number of rerolls you have left, and UR is set to 1. That means that the computer will know that we've used up our reroll for this time, and next time it comes down here, because this if, one of its requirements is that UR equals 0, it won't give the player a second option to reroll. It'll just continue right on without giving them that option. So reroll gives us the option to try again, except that we've got this flag that won't let us try for a third time, and then RR is reduced by 1. And that is it. There's more code over here to do with bridge, but it works the same. It's just, sorry, I shouldn't have gone to that one first. I should have gone to this one. It's just that Z is 1, which is strength instead of size, and W is bridge 2, which is this one here, instead of Wade 2, and then we go to role versus attribute, and then when we come back again, it prints whatever text might have not yet been printed, and gives us two options. Now, if you've been following these videos, you remember that the way it worked previously is you roll twice, and it gives you, there's 3 options depending on what happens there. I couldn't come up with an elegant way to do that that I thought was sort of worth the coding, because I feel like most of the time I'm probably just going to have 2 options, a succeed and a fail. So I just set it up so that if you succeed, then the beast cowers away from you, and if you fail, it asks you a riddle. So I got rid of the most severe option. It used to be that if you failed both rolls, it would throw you off the bridge, and you would lose the game. So that works exactly the same. It's just, of course, that where you go is different, and the details of which attribute you're rolling against are different, and so on. So I hope that was of use and interest to some of you, and I hope that you'll tune in next time.